Hello everyone, and welcome to a different kind of video this time. This time I thought we'd make an investigation theme together. I don't know where this is going to go in advance, what it's going to sound like, what the parameters are going to be, but I thought it could be a cool exercise in kind of demonstrating some of the things that I've mentioned in the past in terms of what I think makes an investigation theme from Danganronpa, and how we can put those things all together to create our own original investigation theme. I'm Corey, or Everything Fantasy. I have a Discord channel, so make sure to join that community as it's very engaging, very interesting, a lot of discussion, fun and games, so definitely make sure to join that. And I'd greatly appreciate your support via Patreon as well, because it helps support the channel massively and covers videos like these, most importantly. So I managed to find a really random Danganronpa generator. A really cool website actually, but I think it just generates random killing game scenarios with characters, personalities, locations, that kind of thing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by generating a random new killing game scenario, and we're going to use that to inspire this investigation theme. So if I pressed randomize, so now that I pressed randomize, we get a hijacked private jet. I didn't expect to get something like this, I'll be honest. I thought it was going to be, you know, abandoned underground or a school or something, not a hijacked private jet. I have committed myself to not randomizing more than once, so let's just go with this. I've also found this random key signature generator. Now it's interesting because if memory serves me correctly, of course there are 3 investigation themes. Box 15 is in G minor, Ikaroshi is also in G minor, and Despair Searching, I can't remember off the top of my head. In fact, let's have a quick listen so we can work out what the key signature is. It's in B flat minor. So G minor, and B flat minor. And all of them have modulations as well, so they change key signature throughout too. But for the purpose of this, I'm going to generate a random key signature, because I don't want to stick to what's already been done before. So if I get a major key signature, by the way, I'm absolutely going to skip, because investigation themes just, I'm yet to be proven that they're going to sound good in a major key signature. For instance, take something like Box 15. In a major key signature, it sounds something like this. That just, I don't know about you, but that just doesn't sound right to me. So let's spin and see what key signature we get.
F sharp major, I'm gonna skip that because it's a major. Another major, hopefully the next one is a minor key signature. Seriously?
Okay, this one is going to be a minor key signature. Okay, we've got A flat minor this time. A flat minor sounds like this. With an investigation theme, then we have to think about how do we want to structure this exactly. I've done investigation themes for fan projects and done my own remixes and everything, and I tend to start with the baseline, because I think the baseline is naturally going to be the easiest starting point, or alternatively the percussion too. I think from memory, investigation themes tend to be closer to the 128 BPM, so let's just go with that for now, but we might change that later on. In Box 15, there is a acoustic bass, in other words, a double bass, sounding like this. In Ikaroshi, we have a synth bass, and it sounds closer to this. And then in Despair Searching, we have another acoustic bass, which sounds something like this. So we need to decide, therefore, do we want to go with electric or acoustic? I'm going to go with electric or slash synth based, purely because I'm thinking a hijacked planar, are we going to really get sort of acoustic bass vibes? I feel like it's more likely to be something either synth-based or electronic in nature. So now I've gone with an electric bass. We need to work out what riff we're going to use for that bass. Now, the interesting thing about Danganronpa investigation themes is they tend to be quite repetitive in the bass line. If I start randomly recording something, let's just see what happens. I'm not sure about that ending, but I like the idea of the phrase. So this is how it looks in MIDI format then. When listening back to it, I actually quite like the ending now. It's amazing how re-listening to something completely changes your perspective of it, magically. So I'm going to chop this up now, and we now have something that's working as a bass line for now. Again, it's one of those things where I'd probably add some variations later on, and change things a little bit, add some variances here and there, that kind of thing. So, now that we have a bass line, I think the next best thing to add would be some level of percussion just to kind of guide the nature of the piece a little bit. So this is Stylus RMX. It's the virtual instrument where a lot of the percussion sounds from Danganronpa actually come from. So, for instance, if we go to 79 shifted jazz, which sounds like this, does that sound familiar at all? It is in fact the percussion of Despair Searching. Because we're on a hijacked private jet, I don't really want something that's overly aggressive. If we were compared to like a school or some sort of underground dungeon or something, I think an aggressive percussion line would make a bit more sense. We're in the air this time, so I think naturally it's going to feel a little bit more airy, if I can describe it that way. So I found one called Oppressor, and it sounds like this. And I quite like the feel of it overall. It's not too aggressive in the sense of a really strong kick, for example, but it has this slight airiness to it that I quite like for the purpose of this track. So if we were to just add this to the track, let's hear what that sounds like. Now, I like to introduce some sort of variances here and there because I think just hearing the same thing over and over again can get quite repetitive. So, for instance, in the fourth bar of this particular phrase, I am gonna remove the last two notes, for instance, and let's see what that does to the phrase. And then it's going to restart. It's the smallest thing, but I think changing things up here and there makes just that much of a difference. On top of that, now, I know from like a mixing perspective, often it makes sense to do all the recording first and then save things like mixing for later on and that sort of thing. But when it comes to effects and creativity and doing things which I think naturally sound quite instinctive for me, I like to do it as I go along. I don't mean proper mixing, I'm talking about creatively and dynamically changing the track in a way that I think just kind of makes sense. So for example, with this particular phrase, I like the idea of the percussion sounding a bit wider overall, really far out in the kind of almost mystical in some ways, and I'm gonna add a delay. I'm going to send this track to an effect which is effectively just a delay called Echo Boy. So now we have the percussion going to a delay. The problem right now is that it's gonna sound incredibly messy. Now that I heard it, it actually doesn't sound as bad as I thought it was going to sound. However, just from a kind of clarity perspective, what I'm going to do is cut away some of the low end. And I'll do that using an EQ. So far we have a good kind of like foundation for the track, but we need something more than just the foundations. So now let's experiment with the overall kind of character of the track, the actual feel that we want to create from this. With Box 15, for example, we have loads of percussion. We have that double bass doing a lot of the work. And we have like things like electric pianos and things like that, which do a heavy lifting as well. The Ikaroshia, we have the synth lines and things like that, which add so much character to the piece. In Despair Searching, we have that electric piano part. The sort of do-do-do, that bit. And we need to figure out what's the character of this piece going to be. Now, I think comparing it to, say, an Ikaroshia or Despair Searching, I think the closest track I think this is going to sound similar to is something like Despair Searching. Although we're on a plane, I'm kind of torn between two things. So I can rule out Box 15. I think Box 15 sounds too cool for this sort of track that I'm going for a hijacked private jet. So instead of that, I think I want something in between Ikaroshia and Despair Searching. Not as intense as Ikaroshia. So I've gone to a free sound effects website, and I just wanted to find an example of a plain sound effect, because I think this could be quite useful in building up the ambience before the track starts. So now we have a plain sound effect in the project. So what I've decided to do is add tremolo, and again, a little bit of delay as well, to give the feeling that it's sort of like rapidly moving faster and faster, kind of like a helicopter type sound. This is what it sounds like. And this is what it used to sound like. So together it sounds like... So now it's worth thinking about what could actually work for an introduction, because so far all of this just kind of sounds like something, like it sounds like it could be part of a track, but we don't get a sense of structure yet. So I've decided to load up a synth, and what I want this to do is almost act as a kind of like a nice introductory build-up. Like we can feel the intensity, we can feel the fact that we're high in the air and a murder has just happened. I don't want it to be too relaxing, but I want this to have a sense of intensity at the same time. It sounds like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the attack of that to make it a little bit longer. So let's record something. I don't know what this is going to sound like, but who knows. I don't want it to feel too like luxury private jet sort of feeling. I want it to still feel like, actually, this is still a killing game. It could be nice in a similar way that Ikaroshia introduces elements of percussion quite earlier on. I want to do a very similar thing. So what I'm going to do is take that same percussion part that we already have, so now we have those two bits combined together. I'm going to add a cymbal to kind of sort of bridge the gap between those two parts. And to do this, I'm going to add a reverse cymbal. So now we have a cymbal. But I want it to be a reverse cymbal. So the way we achieve that is by recording it in. I'm now going to render it so I've got the audio. So now this is the audio of that cymbal. Reduce the length of the track just a little bit, and then I'm going to flip it. So now it sounds like this. And this is what we have so far. Something which actually helps to transition it just a little bit. Now, I don't like the fact that this synth pad continued playing on even after the verse started. And for the sake of kind of ease to begin with, I'm going to add what's known as a marker track, just to indicate where things are happening. So between here to here, we have the intro. And then after that, we have that first verse section. So in order to stop that synth from kind of continuing on once the intro is finished, I'm going to add some automation and just cut it completely off. So it sounds like this. Sounds much more sharper now. In terms of things that could now be added to this, one of the things that really stands out to me is that I actually feel like some form of an electric piano part could work really well for this. Not only does it create this kind of hollow sound, but it just happens to be one of my favorite instruments anyway. Similar to before, I still want it sounding quite distant and in the background, not too up front like, say, the electric piano in Despair Searching. So let's try and record that in. So I actually added a pitch shift towards the end of it just instinctively, which sounds like this. You heard that sort of da. I actually kind of want to have some level of a piano part in the background. Again, not very upfront, but something kind of just to help guide the main verse section, kind of give the player something to kind of latch onto a little bit. So if I just improvise something in. We have a really simple piano part. There are certain notes that I didn't like so much, but we'll live with them for now. And now we have a section B section, which is where the trumpet's going to come in. But before we do that, I feel like there's something missing still, and I think there are two things that stand out to me. One of them is having some more percussion. I think that percussion line on its own doesn't cover it in many ways. And I say this largely because when I think of percussion in investigation themes, it tends to be multi-layered. It doesn't tend to be that there's one thing going on. There's a kind of combination of different things at the same time. On top of that, maybe a kind of synth part underlying it that kind of is a bit more rhythmic in nature, I think could be something that helps to glue the piece together alongside that kind of plain sound effect. So let's see what we can do. In a library called Percussive Adventures, I managed to find a nice kind of pulsating sound. Having said that, although I'm using this library just because out of convenience and for time in particular, this is the sort of thing that's really, really easy and straightforward to just recreate quite quickly. So let's record that in. For the same library, also going to add a shaker sound as well. Perfect. And one thing that's quite useful to do here for these sorts of libraries where the sound kind of just repeats is I'm going to bounce them to audio. I'll show you the problem if I didn't do that. The problem is, you see that's out of time because the sample will start from when you start playing it from. To compensate for that, rendering it in place and just bouncing it to audio gets rid of that entire problem. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Now, no matter where I play it from, it's always going to sound in time. So the next thing I want to do is, we've added loads of percussion, and it sounds a bit more full and a bit more complete overall. I want to add another synth part, something that, again, is going to go in the background, not too upfront. I don't want it to be that electronic. It doesn't sound too buzzy and aggressive for me, but at the same time, it has something that I can work with. And the kind of trick from this is that I'm going to start adding some effects that are going to make it sound a bit more interesting. I've added a phaser to give it a really interesting sound. I want it to be a little bit, it sounds quite dark right now. I think it can afford to be a bit brighter. Now, the main thing I want to do here is add a level of arpeggiation. I'm going to add an EQ because I don't like how bassy it is at the moment. So in order to compensate for that, let's go to one of the lower bands. So let's say around 120 hertz. You see the difference? It's removing that kind of percussiveness. And again, let's add some effects to it. And now we have something that sounds a little bit more musical and something that we can control a bit more effectively. I want to add some more variety to that bass line. I think so far we've got something that works. And so when we have that change of section, I want to change the bass just a little bit, not too big of a leap in terms of the tweaks that it's doing, but let's just play something and see what happens. It's pretty much my motto for anything. Similar to what we had before, but a little bit different, a little bit more varied. Now we have the main star of the show, that trumpet part, to really start to introduce the main melody of the track. Now I don't know what the melody is going to sound like just yet. I'm going to have to play around with it. I don't have an idea in my head. And for this piece, we're very much just kind of going with the flow and seeing what happens. I am going to just play around with a few things without using the trumpet first. I like to almost to be a bit of a surprise. Play something on the piano first and see how it sounds. And then let's introduce the actual star of the show, the trumpet. We have a lot of things like glisses and things like that, and kind of random chromatic notes and things like appoggiaturas and stuff like that. Random musical things that Takada likes to do when it comes to the main melody. So for instance, Ikaroshia doesn't sound like this. It actually sounds like this. So we have a little bit of improvisation, a little bit of flair to that trumpet sound. So I want to do something similar, though this time we are in A flat minor. I noticed that with a lot of investigation themes, the trumpet tends to start lower in register, so we're talking about the low pitches, and then gradually get higher. So let's try something a little bit inspired by Ikaroshia, let's say. Has elements of despair searching, but has originality at the same time. Ikaroshia reference there. Now we're going to start climbing up. something like that could work. Now that I hear it alongside the piano part, I think there are a few notes that are going to have to be tweaked a little bit in order to kind of compensate for what the piano is doing. But that's all right. We can adjust things as we go and see how it sounds. So now let's actually add the trumpet after all this anticipation and build up. So my foot, I'm not going to show this with my camera, but my foot is currently on a pedal that's moving like this, and that's controlling the volume. So here's it low. But I know in advance from having used this trumpet sound a lot, and this is the same one that Takada uses for DR, by the way, that it sounds very dry in the sense of there's no echo whatsoever, there's no reverb. And I know from Danganronpa music that the trumpet, although it's the same trumpet, has a lot of echo and a little bit of reverb to it as well. So I'm going to start by just adding it, because I know I'm going to have to add it. I've now added a reverb, and I'm adding an EQ to the reverb to remove, because I don't need the low end of the reverb to resonate or the high end at all. So now this sounds more DR. Now we've got something that sounds a lot more like a trumpet for a start, and a lot more suited to this particular track. And naturally, because I'm actually using the trumpet now and not a piano, I'm going to do things which I probably didn't do when I was playing the piano on its own. Things like that. Falls like that. Just random other things that I didn't do with the piano because I couldn't do with the piano, but just going to feel a bit more natural using a trumpet. Now, there would likely be some kind of like transition section and a kind of like a verse that goes back to that again. But instead, just kind of like to demonstrate where this goes next, in every Danganronpa investigation theme, there is a key change. And so let's just add that key change. We know it's going to be there. And very simply, I'm going to take all of these notes, go up by 2 semitones. It's the easiest thing, the simplest thing. The bass does have to change. Now let's see how this sounds. And out of all of that, we have the basis for an investigation theme. Now, there's a lot more that would be done if I was sort of starting to kind of polish this and kind of incorporate new sections and more instrumentation and things like that. But I just want to demonstrate the kind of thought process that could be invoked to create an investigation theme, the kind of things you want to be inspired by, how you can introduce elements of originality and things like that, being true to the actual context. So I think that plain sound does such a good job of helping to provide that context really, really well. So all we can do now is hear it back start to finish as it currently sounds. We have something that's working and exists, and only having spent just the time of this actual video to actually do this sort of thing, no preparation, thinking about it in advance and that kind of thing, just shows you what can be possible when you just use principles that worked really, really well from those previous investigation themes and try and build on them and adapt on them. Now, listening back, there are loads of things I definitely adapt and change and kind of want to think about differently and that sort of thing. But I like the challenge of kind of thinking instinctively and just going with the flow and seeing what happens. Because genuinely chose that generated theme once, didn't look at it more than once, went with that key signature, and just kind of went with the flow and thought, you know what, these things could work, let me just go for that. I think one of the biggest things I like doing with these sorts of things, and this is the first time I've done little kind of composer exercises and challenges like this, is just the idea of having to be instinctive about things. You can't pause too much and think, oh wait, I want to tweak this for 100 years. You actually have to commit to things, and I quite like the exercise. It's definitely something which I think is beneficial in terms of how I like doing things and how I like operating, but also kind of trusting yourself and trusting your judgment. I know I've worked on loads of tracks in the past where I spent a good hour working on it and thinking, oh no, I don't like how this sounds, I'm gonna start again from the beginning, and then you end up with this situation where you just sort of give up on the track altogether. All the things that I really love working on have kind of resulted in something really nice sounding, have all been because I went with one idea and I just stuck with it. Even if I think, this doesn't sound quite right, I want to change it later on, I just stick to it and commit to it, and eventually you get something which sounds like it could be a piece of music that incorporates all the features of what we currently hear in a Danganronpa track. So I hope you enjoyed this video. This is the first time doing something like this. Interested to know what your thoughts are, and interested to know as well, like, what sort of things would you like to see of this nature? Is there anything you want to see more of? Definitely let me know in the comments down below. But for now, thanks for watching, and take care.